breaking down everyday workplace issues and diagnosing the hidden sickness, not just the obvious symptom. Our hosts, James and Kobe.
Did we lose a patient?
No, that's just my lunch. Hey, I'm James, he's Kobe, and we're doing something a bit different today. So this is a bonus episode of Diagnosing the Workplace, and we are really excited for this because we are participating in the Podcasthon.
Yeah, so we're doing something that's part of a kind of like global kind of nonprofit initiative that encourages podcast hosts to dedicate one episode of their show to a charity of their choice. And then all of these episodes of these podcasts that are participating in Podcasthon are going to be released kind of simultaneously throughout kind of a set week here in mid-March. The point of the Podcasthon is creating like a massive international wave of inspiring audio content to raise awareness to a huge number of charities worldwide. We're very excited that we were asked to participate. If you want to learn more about Podcasthon and some of the other cool episodes in this place, go to podcasthon.org. And we're pretty excited to talk about the charity that we chose. Because the charity that we chose is not necessarily about national or international big charities. We want to talk about your local food bank.
Yeah, food banks are a massively important part of our communities. They are charitable organizations that provide a tremendous amount of support to your neighbors, to your family, to yourselves. The usage of food banks has also increased substantially over the last number of years, consistently. And it's a broad usage too. It affects everyone. Food insecurity is a huge national, local, provincial, state, national, international problem. And there are lots of resources to help people, but they need your help to help others.
Yeah, and what is so important about food banks in general is that they are something that most people or everybody really knows about. And
Yeah.
everyone has, I'm sure, has seen, at your local level, like encouraging for donations and hey, do you want to, like stores, hey, do you want to donate $1 for your purchase to your local food
Yeah.
bank? And we hear kind of about our local food banks all the time, but I think it's one of those things where we hear about them kind of and we know they exist. And if you're not someone that uses them or you're not someone that uses them, it's not something that's really top of mind for you.
And sometimes we only think about the food banks at Christmas time. And it's an important time to support your local food bank so that people have healthy, nutritious meals during the holiday season, but they need the support throughout the rest of the year as well.
Absolutely. And that is one of the things that is one of, food, you're right. I think food banks, if they do enter people's minds, it's usually around Christmas time.
Yeah.
But the thing is that they're not only used at Christmas, they're used consistently throughout the year. But donations tend to be plentiful at Christmas time. But then the problem is a lot of food banks are kind of like expected to kind of make those big donations that they get around Christmas time last throughout the year, and they just don't. And that's something that most people know, oh, I never really thought about that. But the other thing that I like about promoting and really trying to raise awareness about the value of food banks is that they help your specific community. If you
Yes.
donate to your local food bank, 100% of the donated food is used by someone in your community. So it's 100% donations, and if you provide money to your local food banks, then it is used to purchase the non-perishable stuff so that the local family, like people that possibly, if you're not one that uses them, you probably do know people who do use them, but you may not know that they use them. So it's one of those things where it stays in your community. It's hyper local. It's something that I say when it's food, it's 100% of your donation goes to help someone make their life a little bit better. So it's one of those things where I would say food banks are like the least of the sexy kind of charities out there, the ones that people get excited about, but they're just
Their
consistent.
impact is almost beyond measure.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I want to kind of talk about a little bit about is like, like so first let's prep some folks here. We did some major homework to prepare for this episode. One, we always like to make sure we know what we're talking about, but it's one of those things where we wanted to just provide really helpful kind of ideas and information. So we're going to talk a little bit about kind of like some lesser known facts about food banks, kind of as we
Yeah.
go. We're going to get into some statistics. And we're going to talk about statistics primarily in Canada and the US, so that we do have a little bit from the UK. But I think we want to kind of also state that when we're talking about some of these broader stats, I think there's a lot of relevance to like the Canadian stats and stuff that will likely be similar in the UK and in Germany and in Europe and in Scandinavian countries and in Australia and that kind of stuff like that. Like this stuff is pretty much global, as you were saying earlier. And uh, and then we're going to go into probably a bit of a darker, more um,
More James-like
yeah.
conversation.
So you might have noticed a snarkier tone to the title of this episode. And let me just say that that title was chosen by James as we got into researching some of the stats that we wanted to talk about this episode, and his blood started to boil. So we're going to talk a little bit about just lesser known facts about food banks, and we're going to get into some statistics, and then you're going to see James picking up speed at with his rage. So
Yeah,
buckle up
as
for
I do.
that. So why don't I just take a little bit of time and talk about just some general facts about food banks?
Sure.
Okay, so as we said before, people donate, like mostly around the holidays. And this is often when food banks are overwhelmed with donations to the point that they actually run out of room. So if you are like, I want to donate to my local food bank, when's going to be the best time? Non-busy months, which tend to be kind of like the slower times, are like, not around major food-related holidays, like not around Thanksgiving, not around Easter, not around Christmas. The kind of off, quieter months is probably the best time because, like I say, around holidays is when they're the
Yeah.
most overwhelmed.
I just want to clarify, when you're saying quieter, you're meaning quieter in terms of the volume of donations, not in terms of the volume of need.
Yes, the volume of need never real. There's never a quiet month in
Yes.
when it comes to need. There's only quiet months in terms of donations. So that's something that if you're like, when's the best time? Um, like a
Right
couple like
now. Right now is
yeah,
a really good time.
absolutely. Kind of like May, great time. Summer, phenomenal times, right? September, an absolute amazing time. So, like, just like, there's never a bad time, but there's really good times. So that's kind of the first thing we want you to know. The second one is about often when you go into like stores, they'll have pre-bag donations from
Mhm.
supermarkets and grocery stores. Don't buy those. They're really not what there's very, very few stores, if any, but we'll round up and say very few. Consult with food banks to see what food that is actually
Yeah.
needed. A lot of times some stores just dump excess stuff in there, and even some still actually mark up the
Yes.
price on a lot of food bank donation.
And this one is one of the facts that started the blood boiling
Yes.
because not only do they give give donations that are useless or not well constructed, not
Mhm.
only do they mark up and make money off of the so-called donations, they are using your money to get a charitable tax receipt while providing something of little to no value to the actual charity that they propose to support. So if you want to support charity, do not do it through a grocery store or a chain. It's unlikely to have the impact that you want. It's easy and that's what and convenient, but it's not going to have the impact that that same $2 in the hands of somebody who works for a food bank, who can use that money to buy what's actually going to help people, will have such a greater value to them.
Yeah. And that brings us to the third point is that cash donations are extremely valuable to local food banks. Partially because, again, when we donate stuff, we often know they want canned goods, they want like box goods, they want non-perishable stuff, right? But think about the kind of the nutritional value of a lot of those things. They're great, they're great sides, they're great, proteins sometimes, but they're not great for nutrients, not great for vitamins, which is what you kind of need to get, comes in the perishables, right? Comes in the milk, it comes in the vegetables, and that's what the cash donations are primarily used for, is to buy the healthier foods, the perishable foods, so that people are actually getting balanced meal and good nutrition from the food bank.
Yes.
So please consider giving cash donations. And like James said, give them to them yourself directly. And the last one is if providing food is something that might be a little bit tough, or providing money might be a little bit tough, volunteer. Food banks are typically run like 5% by staff
Yeah.
who are overworked and really just pushed to the limit. And it's usually 95% volunteers that what make food banks possible.
Hmm.
And sometimes, these may be one-time volunteers, they may be regulars, they could be students. But it's a great place to volunteer, and it's actually a great place to bring your family to volunteer. Like maybe during the busier times, so during the holidays, maybe if you don't want to, if you're not, don't want to give the donations or the food, give some time. They could definitely use the help. But again, it's one of those things where there's no wrong way to support a food bank when it comes to if you're giving the food, if you're giving money, or if you're giving your time, everything is definitely going to be well used, and you are helping your local community, not communities elsewhere, not communities that are so far removed from you that you won't feel it. People in your neighborhood are going to be helped by that.
And as challenging as it is to run off of 95% volunteer staff,
Mhm.
it does speak to the other element that sometimes is not always present in charitable organizations, and that food banks typically have a very low administrative cost, right?
Mhm.
So when you give money, some of that, for whatever charity you give to, goes to the cost of just running the charitable organization. It has to. There's
Mhm.
operating costs, like all of us have operating costs,
Absolutely.
but food banks tend to have a very, very low operate administrative cost, where other charities have been quite publicly known as having very high administrative costs, and the $10 that you give, maybe only six of it goes to the actual need, right?
Right.
So it's one more reason why your local food banks can really good use of cash donations.
Yeah. Now, there are kind of like national food bank groups that people should be aware of. Like in Canada, there's the Canadian Food Bank, which is
Hmm.
it's kind of a global organization that kind of funds, provides funding to local food banks. There's Feeding America, kind of the same thing. There's I think it's the Trussell Trust, I think is what they're called in the UK. There are like national or
Yeah.
large, or if not like, or if not large nonprofits themselves, but there's charities that definitely support them. So if you're like, I don't know, if I can't find my local food bank, but I still want to help out, then you can look at some of those national ones. But we always kind of say we recommend go right to your local food banks.
Local first if you're able to, but
Yeah,
those organizations do great work as well, right? They're
absolutely.
all part of the supply chain
Mhm.
of promoting food security for people. They provide research, they provide advocacy, they provide a lot of really important other elements, where your local food bank, if you want to impact your community, local. If you
Right.
want to try to impact policy or advocacy, those national agencies can be a really good resource for that.
That's a really good point. So let's just talk a little bit about why they're so vital and look into some of the stats we found out. Now, a lot of these stats come from these national organizations,
Yeah.
Feeding America, Canadian Food Banks, and that sort of stuff. But just to kind of like make it clear how big of a deal they make in your community. So there was over 2 million visits to food banks across Canada in March of 2024, which is just the time that they were capturing the data.
Yeah.
So 2 million visits monthly is basically what we're saying in 2024, which was up 6% from 2023. And that was up, I believe, 5% from 2022. It is growing by 5 to 6% every year since COVID. It was going up a little bit before COVID, but COVID really poured
Yeah.
gasoline on this food insecurity fire.
And this is where an example of where one of the few times compound interest is a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because if you think about it, that's like, that turns into millions additional visits a year.
Yeah.
6%, 5% every year. So the need is going up. Now, 42% of food bank users in Canada are single adult households, which are the most common types of households that access the food banks. So so single people living off a single income are again almost half of the food bank users in Canada.
Yeah.
Now in the US, 100% of US counties have food insecurity. Now, some of them have a much higher rate than others, but every single county in the US has food insecurity. But people in rural communities and honestly in the southern United States are often more likely to lack access to enough food. And this has to do with different factors like around unemployment and poverty and cost of living. But I mean, there is not a county in the US that is not struggling with food insecurity. So it's
Yeah.
one of those things where, like we say, hyper local would be really helpful because your neighbors are dealing with food insecurity. That's just a fact.
Yeah. And the fact that, what is it, 47 million people in the US face hunger,
Hmm.
and the soul crushing realization comes when you realize that 1 in 5 of those people are children.
Yeah. And that's just it. Like we say that, single adult households are probably in Canada are probably some of the largest or some one of the most common household types. But let's not deny the fact that there is a huge amount of child poverty
Yeah.
and amount of child hunger in Canada and the US and also again in the UK and I'm
Yeah.
sure in
We
Europe
can
too.
speak
Again,
more confidently about Canada and the United States, but these are not
yeah,
unique problems by any stretch of the imagination.
yeah. And in 2023 alone, more than 50 million people in the US turned to food assistance for extra help. Like this is one of those things where there is, sometimes with a lot of charities and with a lot of things like this, we're talking about like, things like hunger. A lot of people don't really process the impact. If they go, well, I don't know anybody that does that. I'm gonna say you know somebody that accesses the food bank as a
Mhm.
regular part of their making it through the month
Their
plan.
survival tactics. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's not something that they wear on their sleeve.
Unfortunately, like we all need help from time to time.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there is still a stigma attached to receiving help,
Hmm. Yeah.
which is unfortunate. Um, But I mean, so up until now, it may seem like, okay, you guys talk about workplace issues. You talk about this podcast is diagnosing the workplace. It's focused on organizational effectiveness, workplace, organizational culture, workplace, people and culture. So, what is the connection to food banks and food security? Well, one large demographic that uses food banks are people who are employed. And that's going to feature very prominently in the James Gets Mad section of the show.
Yeah.
So nearly 20% of people accessing food banks in Canada are employed, which is a much higher percentage than I necessarily thought prior to researching some of this data.
Mhm. Well, I mean, if you think about, again, a lot of people, again, food banks are not things that most people put a lot of thought into. If you don't access it or you don't know someone
Yeah,
that you're not aware of people that are accessing it that you know, it's not something that really kind of enters your mind a lot. But everyone does probably have some type of imaginative situation about who accesses food banks and thinking that it's mostly like, people on assistance with multiple kids or kind of like or seniors, but they think, well, if you have a job, you're not accessing the food bank, right? Wrong.
wrong.
Very much wrong.
And in the United States, those numbers are quite a bit higher.
Well, actually, before we jump into the U.S., let's just put a little bit of context here, okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So again, we said now around 20% of those that access food bank in Canada are employed. That's a very similar number to what the Trussell Trust in the UK, which is a major anti-poverty charity and community food bank, they revealed as 1 in 5. So about 20% of people that use the UK food banks were from households where someone worked as well. Now, the American stats are far more concerning.
Yeah. Feed America's stats on, so 20% Canada, 20% UK are employed. In the United States, according to Feed America, it's make up employed households make up over half of Feed America's food bank users, which is approximately 25 million individuals. And what's more is that in the United States, it's not just that working families are turning to food banks only in emergencies. Most report depending on their local food banks as part of their regular survival strategy. And so nearly or over half are employed, and 1 in 9 working age veterans are in the United States are food insecure. All of these things paint a fairly grim picture of the need for food security in Canada, United Kingdom, USA, and other places
Everywhere, really.
everywhere. But the United States also has another program called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP. It's what people commonly refer to as food stamps. And what's interesting about that program is that 51% of wage earning adults that are enrolled in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program worked full time hours, so 35, 40 hours a week for 50 or more weeks a year. So you have I believe it was somewhere in the range of about 9 million SNAP users or registers. I don't remember the proper terminology.
Mm.
About 9 million of SNAP users are full time are employed.
Right.
51% of those are full time, year round, working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks or more a year,
Mhm.
and receiving the supplemental nutrition assistance program, and it's a likely assumption that they're also accessing food banks.
Well, yeah, because we say it was about 25 million individuals in America access food bank, which
Yeah,
that are employed. So yeah, and this is just it. Is that what this paints a picture of? Is that there are large numbers of Americans, of Canadians, of Brits, who are working full time and are still food insecure.
yeah,
And as we talked about before, the numbers of people accessing food banks have gone up 5% 1 year, 6% another year, and this problem is getting worse.
yeah. Well, and we
And
think about how much, like, even like with food security goes a lot, or food insecurity go a lot of other very common problems as well. Housing insecurity becomes a major issue.
Mhm.
Access to proper medical treatment. And if you're not able to access proper nutrition, then that impacts your health. And if you're not able to access proper medical or health care, then it has this compounding effect of creating a disastrous situation for people.
Well, and so let's get into this, the getting kind of back into our kind of niche of our podcast, talking about the impact on the workplace
Yeah.
when you have what we deem poverty wages,
Yeah.
right?
So let's actually state the title of the episode: How food banks supplement, what did we call it? Subsidize businesses and corporations.
Hmm.
And it really is nonprofit charitable organizations and or government programs designed to support often the most vulnerable people in our society are subsidizing many large businesses.
Yeah.
The most well-known and largest examples of businesses that are, we'll say, culprits. I was trying to think of a nicer word, but that's really what it is.
This
Um,
episode isn't going to get any nicer, so just lean into it.
well, okay, yes. I will try to remain some. I'm not going to be able to be neutral on this topic, but that's okay. Um, so the problem with this whole conversation is that it's often exceptionally large, exceptionally profitable businesses that employ large numbers of people who are required to access these programs and supports. Walmart is a major example. Nobody listening to this is going to be surprised that Walmart features prominently in the conversation because they have been in the big part of this conversation for years. But it's not just Walmart. There are lots of other large major corporate entities that employ people at a what we would consider a poverty wage.
Well,
And
and the thing is that, but like power, like they employ them at a poverty wage, which really is at their disadvantage. I
it
mean,
is, there's a
because
massive, um, it hurts themselves in so many ways. Anyways, I'm interrupting. You go
yeah,
ahead.
but like I mean, but no, well, I mean, I was just going to build on your point because the idea is that the poverty wages bring exponential greater workforce problems to
Yeah.
businesses. And so we did an episode in season one where we talked about kind of is money the key to talent attraction and retention. We talked about this a little bit. We kind of talked about kind of the diminishing returns in,
Yep.
when you get to certain levels of wages. But we talked a little bit about poverty wages there. But the idea is that it is, it's the compound interest of awful things that happen to you when you're living in poverty because everything, it is so much more expensive to be broke than people realize, right? Because I mean, it just creates a chain reaction, right? So like if you were saying, you're food insecure, you may not be getting the nutrition that you need or the required calories in a day, and that may cause you to have some health issues. Like maybe it's a matter of causing bone density issues because you're not getting enough calcium or whatever it is, which will cause dental problems and dental care issues, and then you have more pain because of that and which exacerbates the problem with like with eating proper foods and and which affects your health and then you get into more health issues and and this is what people is their every day
Yeah.
when they're in these situations where they're full-time employed and they're living on the poverty and they're living with these poverty wages. We talked a little bit in that episode about kind of how expensive car maintenance is when you
Mhm.
can't afford a reliable vehicle, so you're missing time, and then and what this does is this creates problems for the employer, right? Because when you're employing the working poor, it comes with inherent issues around higher health issues, around more childcare issues, around more transportation barriers. There's all these
Higher
different.
levels of absenteeism, right? Like it's all of the things that we've heard for years businesses complain about or raise as an issue. One of the challenges is around, you know, how do I find reliable people? Because the people who I'm employing they're not showing up, or they're calling in sick, or they have too many issues at
The
home,
cars are
or
always in the
their
shop.
car's always breaking down,
Kids
and
are
their
always
kid
sick.
always needs something. And
Yeah.
right. So all the problems are framed from a employee perspective. It's their problem. It's the individual who is not doing enough to fix their problems, when the problems are compounded by so many other factors.
Mhm.
And there is I mean, if people do not have enough, if they have to choose between keeping the lights on or putting food on the table, or feeding their children versus feeding themselves, right?
Mhm.
These types of decisions not only have a direct physical impact on people, they have a significant mental and emotional impact on people. And
Mhm.
you cannot expect that when somebody walks through the doors of your business, that all of that baggage is left at the door. It doesn't happen. You may want it to.
Mhm.
It's not a reality. It's not going to happen.
Well, and one thing that we've heard a lot, because again, a lot of the work that we do is trying to address things like talent attraction and retention issues with businesses, is that like, like why is it so hard to find anybody now? The people haven't gone anywhere, but why is it that no one, is applying for our jobs, or this or that? Well, one of the things that most people don't realize is that when the cost of living exceeds kind of the standard, the standard reliable wage for someone, it actually pulls single parents out of the workforce.
Yeah.
And that's something that most people don't realize, is that when we have this culture of poverty wages, and we have this high cost of living and all this, and food is so much more expensive, we have all these kind of like recessionary issues. What it does is, because of like things that James just said, people not being able to be healthy enough to eat, or kids not being healthy enough to kind of go to school reliably, or childcare is too expensive, that all that pressure is compounded on single parents, which pulls many of them out of the workforce, or it has or even in some cases to a lesser degree, but still a big problem, where you have two parent homes where one parent has to leave their job to deal with all of these other kind of things too, right? So
Yeah.
it actually creates this talent shortage, because of this reduction of opportunities and this reduction of reliable employment for single parents, specifically, but also kind of pulling parents out of the workforce.
Yeah, these are multifaceted, complex issues
Connected though.
they are connected. And you can't expect that if you are going to we're not saying that the be all and end all fix is to pay people more money.
No.
That's going to help. That Let's be realistic. That is something that would help, but that's not the be all and end all.
Right.
And for especially because it's not just the big companies that this influence impacts. It impacts mom and pop shops as
Mhm.
well. It impacts small, medium, large corporate entities. It impacts anybody who is paying wages that are in and around the federal, state, or provincial minimums, right?
Mhm.
Um, and that's a large number of employers. Your ability if you're a small company, you may not have the ability to pay a substantially higher income to the point where it's going to, uh, you know, magically fix all of these problems. What we need to do is look at ways that we can better support people. There's a number of issues at play, and one of them is that we only ever look at what we offer employees from a single dimension of, are we being competitive with what everybody else is doing?
Right.
Right. So you've heard us talk way too much about the factors of the workplace, compensation being one very important one, and how they need to be not only competitive, but they need to be sufficient and equitable.
Right.
And this conversation really lives deeply in the concept of, is our compensation, is what we provide to people, our mental health, our wellness supports, whether it's mental health or otherwise, are we being sufficient to accomplish what we need to accomplish so that people can provide their best work to us?
Hmm. Absolutely. And that's just it, is that like like the measuring stick that most corporations have always used, and most, well, the business community kind of sees as the again, as a way to kind of gauge their success in with these factors, is around, well, are we in line with our peers? Are we in line with other businesses in this area? And the problem is that's a false kind of that's a faulty way to look at it, because it's a bad metric.
Hmm.
Because what matters more is, okay, it's not just, are we able to, are we meeting what our competitors are, but are we actually meeting the intended purpose? Are we sufficient in applying this to them? Because a lot of times, you know, these, large corporate entities who are just comparing each other with each other are all blowing it.
Yeah.
And
You
we
can be
talked about,
competitive with everyone else and still be
yeah,
terrible.
but if everyone sucks, then guess what? You suck.
Yeah.
But it's the idea too of, like, we talked about this idea of what we call the amazing race to the bottom, which is when all we're trying to do is stay competitive with with who we see as our peers, or we see as our direct competition in the labor market or in the consumer market, and we're just trying to make sure that we're just in line with them. But as we realize, that's not meeting
Yeah.
sufficiency, then we're all just racing to see who's the top of the worst, is really what it is.
Well, that's just it. Competitiveness is the floor. And when
Hmm.
everybody races to just maintain that baseline minimum floor of what's acceptable, the there's actually a tremendous opportunity for those who are a little more ambitious
Right.
with their businesses. Because when everyone else is racing to the bottom, it doesn't take an awful lot to step up and above the crowd, to make
Absolutely.
yourself as a distinct and viable choice in the labor market by doing just a little bit more than what everybody else is doing. Right? Not just on the competitive angle, but remember, it's also being sufficient and equitable.
Right. Absolutely. So, I mean, if this is something that you want to learn a little bit more about, let's be clearly there. We've got a number of episodes where we've talked about kind of job dissatisfaction. I think there's an episode in our first season called "Why is Job Dissatisfaction So Dangerous?" And we really get into competitive, sufficient, and equitable, and what we call the 7x3 rule in that episode. That might be a great place for you to check out if this is something that's of interest. Um, but I know you've got this Walmart thing you want to talk about.
Yeah, I
I'm just
touched
gonna,
on
like,
it
I want to
and
open the, yeah, I want, because I thought that might derail us, so I want to open the floor up to you and tee it up to you. Go ahead now, James.
okay, so let's review a few statistics that we've already talked about. This is going to focus on primarily US statistics. So, approximately 50% of the users of food banks in the United States are employed. That accounts for around 25 million people. Approximately 9 million people who are enrolled in the SNAP program are employed. Wage earners is the language that they use, and 51% of those work full time year round. Um, we're going to look at 2018 because we couldn't find we wanted actual numbers and statistics and data to talk about, and post-COVID data hasn't been readily available and reliable.
Well, the other thing too is that we all know since COVID, things have gotten so much worse around food insecurity.
They have.
So some people might be saying, "Well, you guys, you're talking about food security post COVID. We all know it's been an awful situation." But I mean, it wasn't always that way.
It,
Well,
it was always that way.
yeah, let's take a
2018 was considered a pretty, like, from an economic standpoint, the US economy had a very healthy, the GDP went up. Like, it was a good economic year, not all around, because
Hmm,
not everybody benefits from the fruits of that equally, but
right.
that's an entirely separate rant. But in 2018, in the a survey from the United Food and Commercial Workers Union claimed that 30% of Walmart employees really relied on public assistance, including food banks, to make ends meet.
30%.
30%. Now, that could be an overestimate. Let's be generous and say it was 20%.
Sure.
Right? Because maybe you don't trust that a labor union is going to report the facts in the same way that another agency, whatever, doesn't matter. A large portion of Walmart workers rely on these programs. In 2018, Walmart's net income, so their actual profit, was about $10 billion. But not only did Walmart make a profit of $10 billion, their payout to shareholders through dividends and stock buybacks was an additional $14 billion. So you have a healthy and strong economy with one of the largest employers in the country paying wages that require their workers, up to 30% of their workers, to access charities that to support their food security, and government programs, which costs taxpayer money to in order to survive, while at the same time they are posting a profit and a dividend and share buybacks to the tune of $24 billion in that single year. This is how food banks are subsidizing large businesses.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where it's a very stark reality that again, this was just a year that
That was just 2018.
yeah, and that was just the one year that the study was done.
Yeah.
It's it's logical to anyone with half a brain to know that that wasn't, the one year that it happened.
It
That this
is
is
exceptionally unlikely that that was an outlier.
exactly. So this is kind of the standard. While companies are making ridiculous amounts of money, which they're allowed to do.
We are all businesses are in we are in business to make money. There's
Yes.
nothing wrong with making money,
Yes.
but there is something wrong in making money by exploiting people.
Or
That's the
by
core.
expecting these charities and these government programs to make up for the lack of money that you're paying your
Yes.
employees because you need them to be reliable. And you're like, well, we don't have to pay them all that much money because that's what food banks are for, is maddening.
Yes, it is. And the problem is, as this makes me obviously, I have difficulty hiding that this makes me a little irritated.
Return.
Um, Perturbed, sure, slightly vexed, but it's not a simple answer, right?
No.
There's not a magic wand that we can wave that says that unless there's a significant change in political will, that's the only way that these types of changes are going to happen. The point of this episode, even though it's fun for me to rant, it's one of my favorite pastimes. The point of this episode is not to make people mad at Walmart, to mad at the mom and pop shop, mad at the people who are accessing these programs. That is not the intent of what we wanted to do.
Right.
what we want to do is highlight how critically important, what a crucial, fundamental role that food banks play in our communities, in every community, with people that we know, whether you know it or not, your neighbors, your friends, your relatives, people you know are accessing the food banks, and it's not a negative stigma on them. It's about, we all need help sometimes, and the need is great, and it's only getting greater. So if you can support your local food bank with food donations, with, if you're able to, a small monthly recurring donation to a local food bank could be a massive boost for them to provide them with a little bit of consistency in what they're able to receive. But do what you are able to, do what you're comfortable with. But if you're able to do something, we ask that you look at supporting your local food banks.
And again, just be aware of the that they're they're a vital role to the people that you run into on a daily basis,
Yeah.
right? Largely, probably, it's safe to say that probably 1 in 3, we're going to round it up a little bit, of the people that you run into in large retail jobs or stuff that we know are kind of lower paying jobs, it's a reality that maybe 1 in 3 of them may be accessing the food bank. The people that are packing up your groceries, the people that are carrying stuff out to your car, people that are ringing in your stuff. It
People
could
who are working full time, who
yeah.
have, they are employed. They have chosen to put in the effort. They work full time, and they still need the little bit of support to ensure that they and their families can
And,
survive.
and let's be clear, the same people that were deemed essential workers
Yeah.
during the COVID days are, is likely that up to 1 in 3, maybe we'll round down a little bit and say 1 in 4 are probably requiring food banks as
Yeah.
part of their monthly survival program. So we really encourage you to give local, support your local food bank. Again, we want to remind you of the lesser known facts about, if you can avoid the busier seasons or on holidays when they're a little more
Don't
overwhelmed.
avoid, but if you
Yes,
have
sorry.
to
Yeah,
select
right.
when to give,
Yes.
um,
Yeah, if you have the flexibility,
yeah,
the non-busy months, which tend to be outside of the holidays,
yeah,
are probably the
the
greatest
need is absolutely still there.
and the most convenient time for the food banks.
Yeah.
Again, don't buy the pre-bag donations from the supermarkets. Support them directly yourself.
Yeah.
And again, don't buy those like, here's a bag that you can just buy and drop off to the food bank yourself, but you don't know what's in there. Food banks are pretty good about publicizing on their social media or what they're looking for. So if you're not too sure what to give them food wise, you just have to ask them.
Ask, they would love to tell you.
Absolutely. And they would say, please share this list with anyone that you know. But
Yeah.
it's always better to give cash donations because, again, the food banks use that money to purchase the healthy foods throughout the year. And also consider volunteering, right?
Yeah.
It could be, a family event that you do. It could be a weekly thing that you try and do to give back. It could be something that will have such a huge impact on your friends, on your neighbors, on your family.
Yeah.
So there is, again, there's no bad way to directly support your local food bank.
And if you are someone who wants to help influence policy, influence advocacy, influence research around food insecurity, remember that there are national agencies that are dedicated to that, that do great work and could use your support as well.
Right. And that's Food Banks Canada in Canada and Feeding America in America. So,
And
they're
what
not,
was the name of the UK
it was
Trussell
the Trussell Trust in
Trussell
the
Trust?
yeah. But honestly, like we tried to find if there were, what countries didn't have food banks, and I couldn't find a single country that didn't have a pretty significant food bank kind of like, need and system that's there.
Yeah.
So if you are listening to this on the planet Earth, then,
Chances are,
yes,
yeah.
that you can support a local food bank, and you could give to a national one, just again support advocacy and research and whatever. So I think we're pretty much done with this conversation. I want to thank Podcasthon for encouraging us to kind of shed our normal format, and and to dedicate an episode to a charity that we think is important. I think our passion for supporting local food banks might have come out a lot, might have been masked by James's rage a bit.
The rage and passion go hand in hand.
There you go. But yeah, so again, consider checking out other podcasts, learn about other great charities that you can support. Again, you can find them at podcasthon.org. If you see our social media kind of promoting this episode and podcasthon.org, please share it with other people, because this is a great way for people to learn more about things that they didn't know that, are having a huge impact on the world around them. And we're just happy that we were a part of it.
Cool.
All right. So that about does it for us. So for a full archive of our podcast and access to the video version hosted on our YouTube channel, visit roman3.ca/podcast.
For more information on topics like these, don't forget to visit us at roman3.ca. Side effects of this podcast may include improved retention, high productivity, increased market share, employees breaking out in spontaneous dance, dry mouth, aversion to the sound of James's voice, desire to find a better podcast.